Welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast, conversations with today's top ministry leaders to help you lead better every day. And now podcasting from scenic Colorado Springs, Colorado, here's your host, Jason Day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another great episode of the Church Leaders Podcast. I am your host, Jason Day, and I had the opportunity to connect with Jordan Gustafson this week. Jordan leads the church mobilization efforts of Food for the Hungry, which is a global Christ-centered NGO working in over 20 countries with the vision of seeing all forms of poverty ended through sustainable, holistic community development and disaster relief. Jordan is also a pastor and church planner and speaks regularly at churches across the country. In this episode, Jordan and I talk about how your church can proactively address global injustices and experience revitalization at the same time. We also discuss the value of longer-term partnerships in international mission ministry, especially in the midst of crisis, and how your church can shift from short-term projects to long-term relationships. This is a very insightful conversation, so please join me in my conversation with Jordan Gustafson. Jordan, welcome to the Church Leaders Podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Hey, thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate it, man, and excited to jump into this topic as well together. I think it's really important.
Awesome, brother. Now, I do want to touch on some items that are specific to ministering through crisis, since we're experiencing a lot of crisis right now. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear from your own experience as a church planter, as a pastor. Why is engaging in cross-cultural community transformation in vulnerable areas around the world so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one, that's a big question, but two, I think it's so important because we're a part of something so much bigger than simply what's right in front of us. And I think it's our call as pastors, as ministry leaders, to help other folks engage in such a way to view the world not as just simply what's right in front, but as something that is significantly larger, knowing that there are people all around the world that bring beauty and depth and so much of who God is really into the world that we don't get to see on a daily basis. For so many of us, we live in the same places that we've grown up, or we've moved somewhere else. And so what ends up happening is we really get I think comfortable to some extent. And so what I think the importance of a cross-cultural relationship or a cross-cultural partnership within your church is really so much so that we put the world in front of our people, and we invite our people to be able to serve the world, to be able to lean into, again, not only look what I can do or look what I've done, but more so look at the relationships that we can have, and what binds us together at the end of the day is Jesus and Jesus Christ alone. The incredible unity that we can see that comes from that, the incredible wholeness we can see in the body when we engage cross-culturally, and at the same time also the expression of diversity when we're able to enter into cross-cultural relationships as a church. And so I think it's important more than anything just because we are called to it. We are called to experience and to bring what we have as image bearers, and also to receive and to be in relationship with those who are also image bearers around the world.
Yeah, that's good, Jordan. You know, we see a lot of injustices in our world today, and we see many right here in our own country. In fact, you know, as we're recording this, not only are we going through the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, but here in the U.S., you know, there are riots in the streets. There's a lot of protests going on. There's some violence that's happening, as well as some peaceful protest. But there's a lot of injustice. You know, why should a church, let's say a church here in the U.S., why should they get involved with what is happening in other countries?
Absolutely. I think, again, very, very similar to what I'm saying is to be involved in another country is to say that I see you. I think so often we can be isolated. So often countries can be isolated. So often our communities can be isolated. And so for somebody to step up and to say, I see you, and we're going to go through this together. We're going to lean in together. We're going to jump in together. There's so much more that happens than just right in front of us. And I think it's important that we engage in the world. I think it's so important that we don't just simply, stay where we're at. We are called to be engaged. We are called to be engaged in our cities and in our states and in the countries, but we're also called to be engaged in the world in that sense of it as well. And so as we look at it, again, it's our job to steward relationships. It's our job to steward people to be engaged in the world. yes, it is taking on something else to be involved in something that's happening elsewhere. And yet at the same time, we have the opportunity, just as anybody else does around the world, to be people of peace, and to bring Christ with us, and to join Christ where he's already present, and where he's already working around the world as well. You know what I mean? And so all that to be said is we're looking about other things in the world. Again, there are things that are happening elsewhere that don't take place here in the United States. And we've even seen right now other people around the world be engaged and join in with what's happening in our country as well. And so just as it is for others to join in us, it's good for us to join in others, and really, again, to bring that wholeness and that unity to the world, to the globe, to see the world from somebody else's viewpoint, and to really, truly, again, I believe so, to see the world as people, to see the world relationally, and to dive in together. And so that's what I would say. I think it's important for us to dive in globally because, again, we are part of this gigantic global body of Christ. And so we can't separate ourselves from everything else that's happening. We must engage. We must press in just as we would in our own backyards. We must with the rest of the world as well. You know what I mean, Jason?
Yeah, definitely. And, it's a reminder, I think, to us as well that that regardless of culture, language, background, social stature, regardless of geographical area, right? That there is family, one, when it comes to being a part of the family of God, that crosses all those boundaries. But also the mission, right, is not restricted by anything. The mission is all of the world, every man, every woman, every child. And
that's right.
And like you said, sometimes we can get, it's not to obviously diminish any injustices that we see in our own backyard. I mean, we need to be present in our own communities, right? But sometimes we can get a bit insulated if we're just addressing things in our own backyard and not looking to proclaim the goodness of God across the world. And expose our people to different cultures and just different experiences. So I think that's good, Jordan, and really appreciate just kind of that global view of what the kingdom is about. And I know that you and your work with Food for the Hungry really champions that and really champions that holistic view, which I think is so incredibly important. And as you well know, there has been much discussion over the past decade or so, maybe even longer, but I know that's really, really grown over the last 10 years or so about missions ministry and about, Westerners specifically dropping into other countries, into other cultures, doing some kind of quick missionary work, and then basically heading back home, right? And so there's been this pushback on, the actual fruitfulness and efficacy of such models, like is it really effective? So I'm curious, Jordan, what's your perspective on short-term missions work versus, long-term partnerships, those types of things?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. I think so much of it, yes, short-term things can be helpful, but at the end of the day, long-haul, long-term relationship, partnership, and impact is so much. I think it has such a grander perspective and vision that it grants us as the church. I think more so than maybe we can even understand at times. And so for me and for us as an organization, we're really looking at these long-term, long-haul opportunities for folks to jump in, to engage, because we truly believe that life is about relationships, and relationships aren't just showing up and doing something, but it's showing up to walk alongside. It's showing up to live with and to be, and again, a relationship, not just over the course of a week, but over the course of years. You get to know people as you think about it, even from a pastoral perspective here, as you think about your congregation. One of the things that happens when you get to know somebody is that you begin to establish trust. You begin to understand where one another are coming from. You begin to really build up the things that are necessary for transformation to happen. And the same is for us in missions work as well. I fully, truly believe that with everything that I am. I think so much of what's been happening in the world of missions is that at times the idea of doing something for somebody is easier than doing something with somebody, but it might not be, and often isn't, as powerful. Yes, we can meet the need, but often there's so much more kind of beneath that need, right? we can scratch the surface, we can meet the need of a surface, but what's sitting underneath that is so much more. And so one of the things that we focus on in these relationships is, again, not only expanding our worldview to understand and to learn from other cultures and perspectives around the world in partnership, but at the same time also it really helps to form and to shape the worldview of communities that are around the world in the areas that we're working in. So at Food for the Hungry, we work in over 20 countries, and all of them are very different and all of them are very specific. But even so much so as they enter into relationship, there is something that is felt between a church and between a community that is unlike anything else. It's unlike showing up and doing something and leaving because it continues on and it continues on. And that's the beauty of that long-term partnership that can be happening in missions work that we're doing around the world. One of my favorite stories as I talk to pastors around the countries is they engage with communities that they're partnering with Food for the Hungry. And they really start this conversation on year one, and they're saying, hey, we can't wait to come back. We can't wait to be with you. We're going to be praying for you over this next chunk of time. And there's almost this disbelief often from a number of different folks. Everybody says they're going to come back, but nobody actually does. And then when a church shows back up, to be the church, to engage relationally, not just to do things, but to be with and to get to know and to remember names and to remember details about people's lives, all of a sudden it begins to shift that transformational perspective. Yes, this physical thing can happen in a place, and that's amazing. But what's more powerful is, again, the spiritual return that's happening in the midst of this. You are seen, you are loved. And for the church members here as well, it's the exact same conversation. I'm seen and I'm loved. I'm remembered by somebody around the world that, again, we're bonded together in our unity of Christ. And that all of a sudden begins to be more powerful than the physical accomplishing of something. And so for us, I think it's this big shift that often in short term, although it can be, again, incredibly helpful, especially if done with an organization that is on the ground and that's staying put somewhere, that can be amazing. But nothing can really change the power of doing something with somebody. Walking step for step, holding hand in hand, really progressing and pressing into the future of what God might have. I think the other thing that long-term, again, relationships and missions do is it shifts things from an event to a process. And I believe that transformation is a process. It is for every single one of us in our lives and who God's made us to be and us becoming who we are, much the same as it is in our missions work as well. It's not just an event. It's not just something to say, hey, look what we've done. And although that is amazing, it's a process. It's a process to say, hey, look what God's doing and look how we've been invited in to join in the midst of that. I think the other thing that long-term does over short-term as well is it shifts us from focusing simply on a project, although great and wonderful, and we need to be able to share it, to the people. And I think that's the most powerful thing that we can be doing as we look at our missions work and what we're doing as churches and how we're engaging in the world, is that we would be far more focused on people than we would be simply on projects. It changes everything. And at the end of the day, I think if we focus on these things, again, the shift of doing for to doing with, of hosting an event to entering into a process, of focusing on people over projects, what comes from that is relationships. What comes from that is shared vision. What comes from that is meaningful results that go far beyond what we can see simply by looking at something. What comes from that is sustainability. What comes from that is dignity. What comes from that is mutual transformation. And that's what I believe we need to be about as the church, as we enter into missions work, both globally as well as here domestically as well.
Yeah, that's powerful. You know, as you look at kind of the long-term partnership versus, you know, just kind of dropping in and doing something kind of at a group, you know what I mean, or doing something, you know, a project that you just drop in, you just kind of do something, then you're out. It really shifts it from something that's transactional to something that, like you said, is much more relational, that focuses on, you have the opportunity to see kids grow up. You know what I mean? Yes. You have the opportunity to see families as they kind of grow over time. You have the opportunity to see the community transformation come to life, right? So rather than just going and digging a well, you have the opportunity to go and be a part of digging a well, but then you have the opportunity to be a part of the first crop harvest, right? Then you have an opportunity to be a part of, you know, watching these family farmers, you become sustainable in providing food for their family, and then beyond
That's
that,
right.
providing food at the market for barter or for sale, and it just keeps continuing to build. Or you could take that anywhere. You could talk about
Absolutely.
education. You could talk about their life in Christ. As they're being
Yes.
introduced to Jesus, just as you said. We see this here in our own churches. We're not just looking for some kind of quick fix, although I think our culture emphasizes that and
Sure.
kind of wants us to default to that, but we're looking for long-term growth and development in our lives as Christ followers, and
Yes.
that's transferable to our relationships overseas as we develop these partnerships. So I think that's important. I think it pushes back against we live in a society, specifically here in the U.S., that's very, very focused on productivity.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
we want to churn out as much as we can, as fast as we can, and when we begin to, I love how you said it, looking to people versus projects. When you begin to make that shift, you're shifting away from just trying to complete this project so we can come back and share a slideshow and talk about this project that we've completed and how much better off everyone is wherever that is because we showed up, right? To
That's right.
this idea of people, where now we're celebrating stories of people. And
Yes.
those projects are still happening oftentimes, right? We're still helping, with education, or we're helping with sustainable agriculture, or whatever it might be, clean water,
Yep.
right? We're still doing those projects, but the focus moves from the project to the stories of the people and the experiences that they're having and the relationships that our local church is building with that community.
That's right. And the other thing, Jason, too, that I'll just say as well is that, the amazing thing is it really shifts it as well, as again, instead of doing something for, to doing it with. And so instead of just simply saying, hey, we have an expertise or we can do something and that's great, it's helping to help people see, again, you've been given gifts, you've been given skills, you've been given talents, you've been given opportunity and vision to see, again, the future, maybe a different way than it is right now. And the beauty that comes from that doesn't only impact a project in that moment, but every single project that comes after that in that specific place, right? And so what you're doing in that moment is you begin to develop leaders, right? You're building people up to say, hey, actually, no, we can do this. We can be a part of this. We can see the change that we desire to see in the community, in the place that we live, by jumping in and by entering in and by being a part of it, not by watching somebody else do it themselves. And so I think it's our job as well to steward the gifts that we have as well, that we get to, to bring into a partnership and into a relationship with somebody, and do that exact same thing. Is again, sharing with people that vision, sharing with people, again, there is opportunity and look what we can do and look what can happen. Simply, again, that's so much stronger and so much more powerful than saying, hey, look what we did. Yeah, that's great. Yes, it's going to be helpful. But what if somebody in a community can say, hey, look what we did.
Right.
Look what happened when we came together. And so I think that's such a huge focus of this as well, man, is that it really begins again, to shift the paradigm a little bit on its head and to say, I think, yes, as a church, we need to be able to share, like you mentioned, that quantitative aspect of it. Look what we've been able to do. Yes, God's blessed this. Yes, God's multiplied this. Yes, and amen. But there's also the qualitative aspect of it, being able to share, again, stories, people. Look who's been empowered and look what this person has accomplished and look what they're going to continue to do. And we got to be a small part of that story. Yes, and amen to that. Let's celebrate that. Those are the things that we need to be celebrating as the church.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what we want to see in our own local communities. I know for me and every church that I've been a part of, that's been our goal, as well as to equip people, to build them up so that they would know how to live their lives shaped by the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that they would be engaged and know that you have the ability to live into your own, again, personal faith life, but this communal faith life as the church, and how we respond and enter into our communities and do the work that the Lord's called us to do as well. And so I think that's the key, again, is it's just as we want to invest in people in our communities here, it's the shift to wanting to invest. And again, like you mentioned, it's definitely not easy. It definitely takes longer than simply just doing something. However, again, if you're looking strictly at a return on investment, my goodness gracious, it is exponentially higher than anything else that we could possibly do around the globe. We must be with people. We must invest in people, not just physical goods themselves.
Yeah, that's great. And as you were talking, I was kind of thinking through, like, from the perspective of, of a pastor and a local church here in the U.S. being engaged in, a long-term partnership. What do we see? Okay, so let me back up a little bit. So it's exciting. We see some cool things happening in this community, right? We're investing, physically, we're going there, once a year, maybe a couple of times a year to actually physically be there and to serve.
Sure.
But we're also, the rest of the year, we're still connected to this community, sharing prayer requests and, videos and updates and all kinds of different things. So there's this ongoing relationship that's being built, which is awesome. Talk to me a little bit, Jordan, about not only what this, I think we can understand what this has done, and I love that you brought up developing leaders, in this community in another country and encouraging them, and you've talked about dignity for them and those types of things as you're doing something alongside, locking arms with them. But talk to me a little bit about on the side of the church here in the U.S., right? The side of the church that's engaging in this relationship. What type of things have you seen in churches in the U.S. that as they get into a longer-term partnership, how does that change the church back home? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a great question. I think the biggest thing that we've seen in so many aspects in churches that we've been able to work with and see this transformation happen is it's really, again, I talked about worldview a little bit ago, and it's that same thing. A church, entering into a relationship, seeing something that's happening somewhere else, bringing that vision home and saying, what does that contextually begin to look like in my own backyard? I think we can see things that can spark ideas, and again, it can look different, and that's a good thing. It needs to fit its context, just as it would with any country that we work in, as diverse as they might be. The U.S. is that much different context, and so we've seen folks come back and say, how do we begin to see the same exact type of work happen in our community, knowing that it is different? And so we've seen churches engage in, development work and start, seed funding small businesses and what that begins to look like, coming alongside healthcare clinics in their communities and figuring out, hey, especially right now, I was checked with a church the other day, and they've mobilized medical clinics around their community in response to COVID-19. A lot of that is again stemming from things that have been seen or things that they're being involved with to contextually say, how do we reach this moment? How do we jump into this moment? And how do we begin to serve at the end of the day? And so again, I think more so it's this open idea of what else could we do? And I think sometimes a lot of things, we need that spark, we need that idea to kick off. And so what that's done is I think, given people the permission to see something and then say, I wonder if. And I think that's a really amazing and a really powerful thing for lay people in our churches to say, I wonder what we could do if fill in the blank happened. I wonder what we could do if we, again, took all the collective gifts, skills, talents, vision, all these things that God gives us as He's created us. And if we put those in act and really mobilize them in our city for the sake of the kingdom, as we do in this community that we're partnered with as well, just as we want to see, again, people empowered to live a forward life in their community, what does that look like here? And so I think for us, more than anything, it's not necessarily the facilitation of that I've seen, but it is the idea and the start of that what if. That has been birthed and blossomed into so many things around the country. And again, that's developed itself into church networks who are going, hey, we're going to work globally together in this space, and then we're all going to come back and we're going to combine and work locally in our city as well. And so I think it paints a picture of collaboration. It paints that picture of unity. And again, how much more can we do if we are running this race together than if we're trying to do it separately at the end of the day? And so again, I think it's collaborative nature, and I think it's starting those, again, what if types of questions, what if types of opportunities, what if I used, my business that I have that God's gifted me with, and what if I use that to make a tangible impact here in our own backyard? What is my responsibility to do that? How do I begin to enter into that? Just as somebody might have given me an opportunity at some point in my life to be able to run forward, how am I giving those opportunities to other folks in my own backyard, as I might be doing that with the community that I might be partnering with somewhere else in the world as well? I think that's the biggest thing. I think, again, it's that spark that moves in transformation that's so hyper-contextualized but so important in what it could lead to. So that's what I'd say, yeah.
Yeah, that's good, because oftentimes we we grow accustomed to our environment, right? And so
Yep.
as we're accustomed to our environment, we don't see things as readily oftentimes, right?
Yes.
I mean, because we're not that we're just necessarily complacent or in a rut, but it's hard to see it because it's there all the time, right? And
Absolutely.
so then you get into an experience where you're in another country, in another culture, and like you said, it sparks some things, and you begin
Yep.
to look at things a little bit differently because you've got completely out of probably your comfort zone, completely
Sure.
out of everything that's normal, and experiencing this, and then when you return, suddenly you start noticing things
Mm,
that you didn't notice before, right? And you start to see,
absolutely.
wait a second, and there's some connectivity, like you said, even though completely different contexts, there are threads, right, that connect. Hey, this is something we
That's right.
experienced there. What does that look like here? Or what if? I love that question that you posed, and so have you seen churches that when they begin to get involved in one of these long term global partnerships?
Sure.
Do you see them experiencing like revitalization?
Yeah.
Here at home, what types of things are being expressed in those churches here?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. We've definitely seen revitalization, and that's been one of the sweetest things personally to get to hear those types of stories. I was at a church in Louisiana that shared that, and I said, you've seen so much, really sweet things happening in your church. Tell me about that. What have you guys noticed? What's been the change? What's been the shift? And it's been really sweet to see the ways that it's tied and connected to, a global partnership that's then birthed movement in their own community as well. They're doing incredible things here at home, but they're a partner with us in Guatemala, and it's been amazing to see the relationship that's been formed between them and that community that they're partnered with. And so because of that, there's so many young people that are flocking to the church. There are so many folks that are getting involved in the community that before, not necessarily were.
Wow,
And
yeah.
so there's these really, really, truly amazing things, I think, to some extent where people feel like I can sink my teeth in. I can
Mm,
get involved. I can be involved. It's structured. I know what to do, how to do it, where to go. And yet at the same time, it's challenging, right?
right.
It's not easy. It's not easy to be involved in your community, especially when so many things can be going on as well. But it's so important, so important. I think it's so much easier to sit back and to watch it happen, and it's a lot harder to truly be the church in that sense of it. But I believe that again, when we give people runways to lean in, amazing things happen. People want to be involved. Before I worked with Food for the Hungry, I had the privilege of being on a pastoral team in the inner city of Washington, D.C. And one of the things that we would say as a church is that often the goal was that people would come into worship, that through worship they would be a part of the community as a whole, and that through being a part of the community, they'd be a part of the justice work that was happening around the city. What we saw happen more than anything, hilariously enough, was the exact opposite.
Hmm.
Through runways that were being created, we gave folks an opportunity to be invited and involved in the justice work that was happening around the city. Through that, they were invited in to be a part of that community, started joining small groups, getting involved, and then from that ended up actually coming to the Sunday church service. But it was all these other things that happened in the community before that truly brought people in to be a part of the church. And it's predominantly young people for sure. And I think that our young people around our country are hungry for that. They're hungry to have a runway to be involved and to see change and to see, again, the kingdom on display, the kingdom moving and the kingdom coming, and say, God's invited me to be a part of this. I want to take that seriously. And so that's the goal at the end of the day is that again, a global partnership and even a domestic partnership long term provides that runway, provides an opportunity where somebody says, I know how I can get involved. I know where I can get involved. I know what that looks like. I have steps to follow, but who knows what can come on the other end of that, right? It's just the start. And that's the beautiful part of it, right? It's just the start. To somebody's engagement. We've seen so many folks engage in justice work, and through engaging in justice work and the outreach of our church community, they came to know Jesus.
Right, yeah.
And so I think that's the key that, as we're looking at as churches, how are we creating runways for people to be involved? And how are we helping people to move down those runways that at the end of the day, one, position them in a relationship with the King, that they wouldn't see the kingdom aside. We can't pursue the kingdom without the King. We have to be focused. And so we want to be in these partnerships that are committed to the gospel, that are committed to the local church, and that are committed to collaboration. When that can happen, I think, again, unlimited possibilities are in front of us, or in front of the church, or in front of our communities, or in front of the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned a little bit about, the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis that we're facing now, and this has obviously opened our eyes to a lot. And
Sure.
I've had a lot of conversations with pastors across the country who were talking about, we had a short-term mission trip this summer that we had planned, and now it's
Yes.
completely canceled. But it seems that the sustained longer-term partnership model that Food for the Hungry has actually can excel in a time of crisis. Can you share
Yes.
more about, how what the work that you guys are doing and how churches are engaged in the process and the model that you guys use? How
Yeah.
is that, staying strong even in the midst of, COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, the first thing I'll point out, and I think it's just so important, is relationship. We, through long-term partners, have developed a mutual trust and this understanding. And through that mutual trust, we have had the ability to pivot. That first and foremost means more than anything else. I think it's hard when you jump into a partnership, or when you're doing something that is more one-off. There's a trust there, no doubt. Otherwise, you wouldn't enter into the partnership. However, the ability of that trust to build, to then take on whatever's coming at you, is so instrumental to, again, I would say, healthy, strong, sustainable work and continuing to happen even when things look radically different. So for right now, you mentioned, again, COVID-19 has been such a huge thing for us. We're doing a COVID response in currently every single country that we're working in, plus some in partnerships with other NGOs around the world as well. We're really grateful for that work. And so all of our programmatic structure has really shifted to this focus. And so we're wanting to continue to walk alongside development, which is, I would say, is what we're known for as an organization. But really, this is a moment for relief. And there's been some really good stuff that's come out in the last few weeks around that. And so, for us, those changes and those shifts, we've been able to remain strong and hold strong relationships with our partners because we've developed that trust. We have that trust. We have the ability to say, hey, things have changed, things are different, but we still get to walk this out together.
Right.
As we lock that forward, there's still that sustainability that was there before, that nothing changes about that. But again, the strategy begins to look a little bit different. The need began to change, and so we must adapt to it. But I think what happens with a long-term partner in that sense is, again, it's the ability to meet the need in that moment, plus what's to come afterwards and what was there before. And so, for instance, I think one of the things I love about Food for the Hungry is how FH was started, and how it really started in 1971 was in a relief scenario. Food for the Hungry, first and foremost, before anything, and before the development work we've been known for now, started in response to pain and suffering around the world. And since then, what ended up happening is we responded in each of the countries, one by one, that we're in currently today, is that we were invited to stay and to be a part of the long-haul development work that would be happening in those places. And our goal wasn't to stay in a community, it's to graduate that community. So we have a 10-year process that a community enters into, and then what happens on the other side of that is the community is set up for thriving and the ability to continue to press their own community into its future, and where it's kind of trajecting from that moment. And so it's long-term development, yes, but there's an exit plan, and it's sustainable, and it's pressing forward. And then things like this happen, right? But you don't expect it, but they happen. It's right. The question isn't necessarily, if a disaster is going to happen, but when is a disaster going to happen, and are we prepared to weather it, and are we prepared to press it forward? And what a long-term relationship does is it really begins to address that question, right? It's not if, it's when, and when is now, and we're ready to respond because of, again, the proactivity that there's been, and the relationships and the trust that's been established through these long-term partnerships. And so we've got churches that are responding with us around the world to COVID-19 who have been with these communities for a number of years at this point. And so the people that they're partnering with, the community they're partnering with, it's not just, some generic place, but they know the community leadership. They know the community pastor. They know, children in the community's names that their churches have been sponsoring. They know all of these things intimately about this space. And so what ends up happening is, of course we want to be a part of this. Of course we want to lean in. Of course we want to be able to meet the need that's there. And it becomes that project aspect, no doubt. But because there's been a focus on the people before, that project begins to reflect the importance in that decision. And that decision is, we want to do this because of the people. We want to do this because of the relationship. We want to do this because of, again, right, how much we care about this place. And at the end of the day, walking it out together. We're able to walk development out together. We can walk relief out together as well. And so, again, what that does is it gives us trust. It gives us the ability to pivot, and it gives us the ability to enter into whatever might come at us as a collective unit, and as a family, and as the global body of Christ.
That's awesome. I love it. Love the work. I love the just kind of the heart behind what you guys are doing. And as we're wrapping up our conversation here, I imagine there are probably some listening in that say, "Man, we would like to be a part of something like this. We'd like to experience this." If people want to learn more, if a pastor or ministry leader is listening in wants to learn about the work of Food for the Hungry, how they and their church can engage, what's the best way for them to connect with you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the one is, please go on, check us out online at fh.org. And so you can see all about us. You can really begin to learn a little bit more about Food for the Hungry, where we're working, and how some of those things are happening. If you go to fh.org/church, we can be able to connect there. And I'd love to have a conversation with you. And again, please feel free to reach out to me as well. My email, I'll give to you right now. It's jgustafson@fh.org, jgustafson@fh.org. And so please feel free, shoot me an email. Would love to have a conversation, and would love to jump in and explore what, again, diving in and partnering together could look like. It'd be amazing.
Excellent, Jordan. And we will have that information links in the show notes for those of you who are listening, so you can check those out if you want to follow up with Jordan and check more things out for Food for the Hungry. It's been so good to have a conversation with you, brother. You guys are doing great work, and just continue to pray for, God just moving through the churches you're engaged with and the communities that you're engaged with around the world for the power and the glory of Christ.
Amen, man. Thank you so much. We're really grateful for you, and excited to see all the Lord continues to have in the future. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. God bless you, brother. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Every week, as we are putting the episodes together, we're thinking of you, our pastors and ministry leaders, and striving to provide insightful and inspiring interviews as you seek to grow as a kingdom leader. We hope you are finding value from the Church Leaders podcast, and if so, we would appreciate you taking a few moments to head over to iTunes and leave us a review. Your positive reviews and ratings help other church leaders more easily find our podcast so they can benefit as well. Thank you in advance. And if you have any comments, suggestions, or ideas for guests, I would love to hear from you. You can send an email to podcasts@ChurchLeaders.com or connect with me on Twitter. You can find this podcast as well as other great faith-based podcasts on the FaithPlay app, available for both Apple and Android. So be sure to check out FaithPlay. Until next time, this is Jason Day, encouraging you to love well and lead well.
You've been listening to the Church Leaders Podcast. For articles, videos, and free resources that will help you lead better every day, visit our website at ChurchLeaders.com. Thanks for listening.